Moonlight flooded the valley with soft milky hues, casting shadows from the branches of the old oak tree that danced in the gentle breeze. Fox was out on his usual evening stroll, his belly grumbling at him and nagging him to find something to eat. It had been days now since his last meal. The menfolk in the settlement had become wise to his wily ways. They'd created enclosures to protect the hens and now took turns sitting guard to keep the smaller livestock from his jaws. The hare folk and the rabbit families had heard of Fox's hunger and scuttled beneath the skin of Mother Earth when other woodland creatures sent word of his approach. Even the shrews were finding ways to avoid him these days. This was the way of the wild. Fox shrugged. Perhaps, he thought, he'd been enjoying an easy meal for too long. The creatures of the farmstead had provided rich pickings for a long time before his excitement had gotten the better of him. If only he'd stuck to taking one fowl at a time instead of chasing and destroying them all in one wonderful rampage. He felt a happy stupor for a few seconds as he remembered the sky filling with feathers and the sounds of chaotic clucking. Then he shook himself as he realised the consequences of his actions. Hunger. His stomach growled at him again. Tawny owls calling to each other across the valley. To-wit! Brother Fox is prowling. To-woo! I know! Fox barked in frustration. How am I ever supposed to find food with you two making so much racket? He demanded. There was silence and then a brief gust of air as the owls landed in front of him. Poor Brother Fox, chuckled To-wit. Are you very hungry? Fox nodded. He's very hungry because he's very greedy, added To-woo. And noisy. Very stupid too, said To-wit. Fox said nothing. Why so quiet? asked To-woo. Fox whimpered. The owls looked at each other, wondering what was wrong. Speak to us, Brother Fox, said To-wit, gently reaching out to touch Fox's nose with the tip of his wing. We didn't realise things were so bad for you. Fox said nothing, but sank to the floor with a sigh. The owls were getting worried now. They circled Fox, every so often nudging him with their heads or gently prodding him with their talons. He seems very thin, worried To-wit. It's far worse than we thought, agreed To-woo. He's starving to death. The owls huddled and then looked back towards Fox, nodded to each other, and flew off. Fox opened one eye and smiled to himself. Before long, the owls were back. To-wit dropped a vole at Fox's nose, and To-woo deposited a field mouse next to it. Fox twitched his nose, but otherwise stayed stock still. Brother Fox, pleaded To-wit, wake up, we brought food for you. Fox let out a small moan, but still didn't move. What should we do? asked To-wit. We're going to have to feed him, answered To-woo. Gently, To-wit fluttered over Fox's head and used his talons to gently grasp either side of his muzzle and pull open his mouth. To-woo picked up the vole and dropped it into Fox's mouth. The owl stood back. Fox did nothing. It's in your mouth, Brother Fox, said To-wit. You need to eat, said To-woo. Ever so slowly, making his efforts look as weak and feeble as he could, Fox chewed the vole and swallowed it down. Is that better? asked To-wit. Fox made a show of trying to nod his thanks, but seemed too weak to lift his head. He needs more, said To-woo. Let's feed him that mouse you found. The owls repeated the exercise with the field mouse, but still Fox seemed weak. They exchanged a look and then flew off to find more food. By the time Grandfather Sun was beginning to rise, the owls had fed Fox a feast of woodland fare, but still they were concerned. Brother Fox, asked To-wit, peering closely, can you stand? You shouldn't stay out in daylight when the menfolk are hunting you. Fox tried to stand, but pretended to have shaky legs and wobbled back to the ground. I'm not sure I can move, he said quietly. Thank you for all your help, but I'm afraid I'm done for. Leave me here and go off to the safety of your treetops. To-wit and To-woo exchanged worried glances, and then swooped one wing each beneath Fox's chest, and half carried, half dragged him back to his den. Once Fox was safely inside, the owls told him to stay put and promised to bring food the next night. For almost a whole moon phase, Fox lazed in the luxury of his den, growing fuller and fatter, and feigning weakness every night while the owls hunted for him and brought food to his bedside. Now who's stupid? Fox grinned to himself. One night, when Fox decided he'd had enough of rodents and berries, he sauntered out of his den and made his way towards the village. It had been so long since his chicken rampage that the menfolk had stopped worrying about him. Nobody stood guard, and the hens were roaming free once more. Holding himself in check, he quickly and quietly stole just one hen, and then carried it up into the woodlands to enjoy a sumptuous supper. As he made his way to the den, Fox stopped by the owl tree and called up to his unwitting servants. "Hey, to-wit! To-woo! I heard you were hungry!" He laughed and dropped his leftovers at the base of the trunk. To-wit and to-woo had been so long caring for Fox that they hadn't been eating themselves. Skinny and starving, they dropped down and ate everything they found there. Pretty soon they began to cough and spat out pellets of nothing but bone and feather. "How could you?" shrieked to-wit. "We fed you for days and you bring us dry remains." "Because I'm greedy and stupid. You said so yourself," laughed Fox. "Maybe you'll be wiser in future." With that, Fox went back to his den, full of food and mirth. To this day, foxes are still known to be one of the most cunning creatures in the countryside, and the owls have learned to be the wisest.